Alright, class, this is for ITS 320 2025. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to set up your Express application. This is going to be our backend in our class for the academic year 2024 to 2025 second semester. Right, so first thing you want to do is already gone through some of the steps, but this video is going to be everything from start to finish, or at least from start up to what we currently have on our class. So first thing you want to do, as always, is you want to make a new folder, and the way that we're going to be naming this is like so. I want you guys to use an underscore because sometimes dashes can't be read, sometimes spaces can't be read, and if you guys have spaces on your file system, please try to rename them or try to remove those spaces, because some packages or maybe somewhere along the future you have a project and the CLI that they're using doesn't necessarily support spaces, and you have to use underscores. So just a preparatory or a preventive measure, if you will. Next up, we're going to want to enter command prompt. Now, by default in Windows systems, PowerShell is not allowed to run scripts. So let's just do everything with CMD. Now there is a setting you can change in PowerShell that allows it to run scripts, but if you're not willing to go through that yet, just go ahead and use CMD. Now the first thing that we want to do when we have a new folder, open up command prompt like I did earlier, just by typing CMD in the address bar here and then hitting enter. It will open a command prompt in that folder. Right. Now we want to initialize our project by hitting npm init. Now init is short for initialize, and it's going to walk you through steps to create your package.json, which is going to where the dependencies of your project are going to be, right? So it's going to give you some steps. Once after you enter it, first it's going to ask you for a package name. The default here is in the parentheses, and we can just go ahead and enter that. Version 1 description, you can skip that, but I'm going to go ahead and put a description on mine. Backend Express app for ITS 320 Angular. Entry point. Now you guys can change your entry point if you want. For me, I'm just going to put it as index.js because that's default. Test command, you can skip that altogether. Git repository, we'll worry about that later. Keywords, and then author, just put your name in there. License, go ahead. Now I want you guys to watch out for the type here. By default, it's CommonJS. Now most of the tutorials that you're going to find online is going to be about it's going to be with CommonJS, especially if it's been, let's say, 6 years back, 4 years back. It's probably going to be using CommonJS. So, and some of the older projects are definitely going to be using CommonJS, but for this class, we're going to be using module. So just type in module there. Now the difference between CommonJS and module is the way that things are exported and imported into files. And you don't really have to know about it unless you want to dive deeper into that on your own. And after the type is going to give you a review of the things that you've entered. So like here we have name ITS 320 backend, description, entry point, the scripts, and the type. If everything seems good, just hit enter because the default is yes. Now if we look back into our folder here, we now have package.json. Let me see if we can make that larger for you. Now we have package.json on our folder here. Next up, we're going to want to open that up in Visual Studio Code. Now you can open folders up in Visual Studio Code by just hitting code dot. and it's going to enter that. If you didn't change anything in the Visual Studio code installation, and if you installed it using .exe and not some kind of portable installation, right? Now we have a blank project with package.json. First thing I want you guys to review after opening it up in VS Code is the package.json, right? Right, so everything looks good. Now we're going to be installing the packages that we need for this backend. So I'm going to zoom that in so you guys can see more clearly. We're going to type in npm install. Now I is shorthand for install, but if you want, you can also write the whole word down. So I'm just going to do npm I. Of course, this is going to be an Express project. So install Express. And then we're going to want to install cores. And then we're going to be working with MongoDB as our database here, and the ORM that we're going to be using for that is called Mongoose. And then last but not the least, colors. So colors is just something extra, right? It's going to allow us to put colors on our console logs so it's more visible if you want. You don't have to install it if you don't want to. So notice with one npm I script, I'm able to install 4 different packages. That's because npm chains install, so you don't have to one by one npm install express, wait for it, npm install course, wait for it. You can just have everything in one go. As you can see, after we installed that, changes in our package.json were made. Right. Now we're going to be making our entry point. Oh, before we do that, I did forget something. And that's npm install nodemon. So what nodemon does is it listens to changes in our codebase, and we don't have to stop and start our application again to see those changes apply. Okay, so I'm just going to clear that. Next up, go to your folders. We're going to be making our entry point. So the default entry point is index.js. So what I want you guys to do is just import express here, and then import course from course. Yep, so import express and import course. Then we're going to initialize express using the app keyword here. Now this keyword can be anything that you want, but for simplicity's sake and for standard, industry standard if you will, it will always be app, more or less. And then from there we can say app.use express.json. It is going to allow our application to parse JSON, and then app.use course. Now before we go any further, you guys to go back to your files here and make a .env file. So .env, here we're going to just have port and MongoDB underscore URI. Now the URI can be blank for now. Somewhere along the line we'll be seeing what to paste onto there. It's going to be the URL for your local MongoDB installation, and if we want to deploy, it's going to be the URL for the database access from MongoDB Atlas. Right. So backend, the port is typically 3000 when we're working with Express. Okay, so now that we have our port, we can initialize here. Const port is equals to process.env.port or default to 3001. Now, why did I make these two different, right? Because first I want to see if the application is able to read our env file. If it is able to read our env file, it's going to put in 3000. If it's not able to read, it's going to put in 3001. Nice. Finally, we have app.listen. We're going to put port here and then a blank function, just console.log. Server is running on port, and that's going to be string interpolation there for whatever the end value of the port variable is going to be. Next up, if you guys remember the colors package that we installed earlier, it's going to come into play here. You don't have to if you don't want to. So just color that up, cyan. And then after we've finished our index.js, now this is pretty much everything that we want for now. Go into your package.json. We're going to be making a script. So that's going to be start and node index.js. Now start is typically used for applications that are going to be running through their production. Here we're going to be using dev. So that's npm run dev nodemon index.js. Right? So we're just going to go ahead and try and test to run it. What I want to see here is a port of 3000 instead of 3001. Okay, so we're getting an error there. Is that gonna work? Right, it did work, so I just had to remove the curly braces there. And if we notice on our port here, it's actually running 3001. And that's not what we want, because that means our .env file is not being read. Now there's something that we have to change here on our script. That's going to be env dash dash. Let's go search up on Google. No, don't be afraid to search up anything if you don't know how to do it. Searching is always there. AI has made it easier. For me, I prefer just searching over Google because I typically use AI for things that I already kind of know, so I already know what to ask it. So here we had to define env file for the JS scripts node. Is that going to be so this dash dash env file and then equals dot env. Go ahead and try that. Nice. So now we have our server running on port 3000. Now let's try and do that on npm start. So as you can see, when we run npm start, which is this script here on line 10, it can't read the .env file. But if we do the npm run dev, it can read the .env file because we've specified it here. So this dash dash env dash file option is always going to be before you declare your entry point or your file. Because if you put it after, it's not necessarily going to work as expected. So just try to follow the steps whenever you can. So now we have our application npm run dev. Next step, I want to see if we can connect our backend to our database. So like I said earlier, the database that we're going to be using is MongoDB. Now, to make that work, you're going to want to download two things. Actually, just one thing now. So go on Google and search MongoDB community server. Just click the first result and just download the MSI package here. Now, I already have MongoDB installed, but it's pretty easy. Make sure you have the MSI option clicked or set. Platform. If you have a platform other than Windows, please just scroll down here. It's pretty much got everything from Ubuntu to Red Hat to Debian. So just install that. And after it installs the server, the community server service for your computer, it's also going to install MongoDB Compass. Now, before you had to download these things individually, but I guess just with community server now, MongoDB is bundled with. So right after you install that, you don't have to change anything. Just keep clicking next, 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 and you should start out with the default settings. And after installation, it should open up MongoDB Compass. If it doesn't, just hit your Windows key and search up MongoDB Compass. It should show up. Right. So I'm going to delete this now, for now, because after you install that MongoDB, this is what it's going to look like. Welcome to MongoDB Compass. You can add new connection, and then you see this URI here. That's default. So just highlight all of it and copy. We're going to go into our code.env file, and that's going to be the value of it. Now don't just copy paste it. We also need to tell MongoDB which collection to store our database in. So I'm going to do that by adding a slash its320. Right. So I'm just going to name this its320. After that, you don't really need to change anything. Just save and connect. And if you get this check here at the bottom left, that means you're good. If it fails to connect, you probably have some kind of issue, maybe with your firewall or your you call this antivirus. All right. Now you're not necessarily going to have the ITS320 collection here yet. So if you just starting, this is what's going to have the three default collections. You have admin, config, and local. Now the ITS320 that we put here on our .env is going to come later once we actually start putting data in our backend. Right. So now we have our .env, we have our entry point, index.js, and we have MongoDB installed. Now we can start making our controllers, routes, and models. So first up, we're going to be doing our models, but I want to just start making these folders right off the bat so we don't have to worry about them later. Now these three folders you're going to be visiting quite a bit, all three of these, because you go from models, and then from models you go to controller, and then you expose that controller in the router. Alright, sorry guys, had to take a quick pause. So again, let's make our models first. So what I want to make first is a user model, right? Because every application starts with users. So here we're just going to want to make a schema with our Mongoose ORM. So first thing you want to do on this file is to import Mongoose from Mongoose. And then we're going to declare our schema here, user schema equals to new Mongoose schema. And then inside of here is going to be whatever property that you want in your user. For now, let's make it simple. Let's have an email and a password. So with Mongoose, you can have several options for your data. So here I have options for my email that to be type string and to be required, and it has to be unique from other entries in the database. After email, I want password. going to be type string as well, and it's going to be required. Now those are the two things that we want for our simple user schema. Now we go down here and then we initialize mongoose.model. Now mongoose.model is going to store user schema into this exposed user variable. Now when we're working in our controllers, we don't have to explicitly type out user schema, we just have to say user. And then we export that. Export default user. Okay, now you can add more to this schema if you want, but that's pretty much all that we need because we're going to be focusing on quotes next. Now that we have our model, I'm going to keep it on the left here. So we have a stable reference, and I'm going to make a new file on our controller. That's going to be user controller. Now here, the only import that you are going to want to call is user from the user model. Now if you're using autocomplete like me, it's just going to put in user model, but it's not going to put in the file extension, right? So just double check if it indeed has the file extension. If it doesn't, it's probably going to throw an error somewhere along the line. And then we can start making our functions. So export function get all users. So this is just a quick function to get all of the users that are currently in our database. So I'm going to try and make a try catch block here. Error. So try const users is equals to await user.find. Now .find is actually a service. Oh, wait a second. We have an error on our await here because we don't have the async keyword on our function. So we need to put an async there. Export async function, get all users, and then the parameters are going to be request and response. Now, like I was saying earlier, this is our user model here, imported from our user model.js. Now, this mongoose model has a couple of options that we can use right off the bat. So that's user.find. Now this is going to find users in our database, and it actually takes options. Now you can put in Boolean options there, or username is equals to correct the username. So this is something that you want to do when you're trying to search for a specific user, but since our function is get all users, we are not going to put in any options there, and if the options are blank, it will return all the users. Then if users rested status 200 json.users, and then if no users, it's going to be 404 not found, json message no users found. So this is kind of the structure that I like to work with. First, I want to do the nullifying operator, because at the end of everything, it will return. So that at the end of everything, we'll just assume that it's successful. That way we don't have to do an if-else statement, right? If it hits this if block, it ends that process. So if there is indeed users, we return rested status 200, and then we return the users. And then if we have any errors, we're just going to console that error and send the whole error out there. Then we're going to set the status to 500 so that our API actually gives a response rather than it just console logging it to the terminal of our backend application. Right, so now we have our simple get all users. If you guys can see, we don't have a use for this request variable, so you can go ahead and take that. You can keep that in if you want it to be more uniform with your other functions. Now I'm going to be making our create users. So export async function create user recros. So again, we're going to be making a try catch block here. If there's any error, we just return console.error and then a status of 500. Then maybe a little something here so we know where it went wrong. Creating user. Now in our try catch, we only have two properties for our user. So that's going to be the email and the password. And we're going to be getting that from the request body. So now on our create, we're using the request parameter here. So request.body, email and password, and then if email is null or password is null, again, I want to do the nullifying operator first, because at the very end of the try block, we're just going to return the user. It's going to be user.create email and password. And if it goes through, let's just return a status of 201. Now 201 is also success, but if you've created something. That's the difference between 200. So 200 is just a success status and 201 is a successfully created status. If you guys want to learn more, just search up HTTP codes on MDN Mozilla on Google and you should be able to read up on those. Alright, so that's our create user function. And don't forget the export keyword here, because that's how we're going to be able to reach our controllers from our routers. So inside your router folder, just do a user routes.js, and here we're going to be importing the functions that we just made. I'm going to drag that over to the left here so you guys have better visibility on it. So in our user controller, we have two functions, get all users and create user. I'm going to just make that all caps. So I'm going to import create user from our controller, and also the get all users. Now that we have those, we also import the router object from Express, and then we do export const user router is equals to router. Then based on the type of request that we are making, we have a user router dot post, because that's create user. But if you're just going to make a read function, if you're just exposing a read function, you don't need to use post. In fact, you don't want to use post unless you're searching for something. If it's just a straight read operation, that's going to be user router dot get. And then just copy the function name that you have up here and paste it down there. Alright, so now we have our get all users exposed on our user router and our create user on our post slash create route. There we go. That's pretty much all we need. We do have the export here already. You have exposed these, but there's one more step before we're actually able to call those. So just to tidy up, I'm going to close these. And then I'm going to open up our entry point index.js. From here, just import user router. That's not quite it. Import, how do we make that? There we are, user router from router, user routes, and then just .js. Don't forget the file extension. There we go, but we have a module not found. What's up? Is that not going to work? So export default user router. Let's try that. We still have an error. Can't find user controller imported from. Ah, so that was actually working. I just forgot the file extension here. My bad. That should be it. Yep, that should be it. So this is the routes file, and then because of this export const user router, we can import it like so. Because it's not a default export, we have to use the curly brackets here. Now that we have that, we go down here, then we just hit app.use /API/users. Now this can be anything that you guys want. If you just want to do users straight away, go ahead and do that. You can. But for me, I prefer putting API first. So that's /API and /users. And then just put the import here as the second argument on the app.use. And there you go. You've just exposed your controller functions in your Express application. Now, how do we test this? Now, I know you guys already know this because we've gone over it quite a couple of times in class. So if you haven't already, go ahead to the VS Code extensions. It's going to be the icon with the 4 squares and the extensions. You just search for Thunder Space Client and download that. Now, if you already have that downloaded, you're going to want to go to your terminal. You copy the port here. That's 3000. On Thunder Client, you hit new request. And let's try the get function first. Alright. So that's localhost 3000 /API/users. Okay. Let's try to get that. Oh, we got a server error because we forgot one critical step, and that is actually to connect our Express application to our MongoDB database. So just go ahead and make a config folder there. Inside of that config folder, there's going to be db.js. It can be any file name that you want. So the purpose of it is we are going to be making our connection to the database here. So import mongoose from mongoose. And then we're just going to make a function here called connect database. And that connect database is going to be a try catch block. Don't forget the async keyword here. So export default async function connect database. And so in the try block is going to be mongoose.connect. I want to store that in a variable, typically con, short for connection. And I also want to use the value that we have on our .env rather than typing it straight out like this. So we're going to initialize URI here. So that's going to be process.env.capital MongoDB URI. If that value is not available, it's just gonna throw in a random connection string there if you want. Alright, and then I'm going to be putting that on here. And we're going to be removing these settings because those are deprecated. Alright, so again, the nullifying if there is no connection, and then we process that exit 1. But if there is a connection, we go ahead and just keep running the lines here. So MongoDB connected. And I want to put some colors on that. So again, we're going to import maybe green. Is that how we did it on our index.js? Yep, no curly braces. So just go down here and then BG green. Okay, so that's all you need on our db.js. Now that the next thing that we're going to want to do is you just copy this function name here, go back to your index.js, and then you import it. Import connectdb from config/db.js, and then we're going to put it down here after the app.use. So that's await connect db. Right. So there we go. We have confirmation that our database is indeed connected. See how easily we found that by making use of the colors package here. So we gave it a green background. Just going to remove those dots because it looks like it's loading. There we go. Right, let's go try that get function again. So now we have a status of 200 OK. That's because our database has nothing yet. Yep, no data there. So let's go ahead and make our data. To make our data, we just change the request type here from get to post. And on our index.js, remember our URL is API/users, but we also defined some more, what do you call this? Something else to append when we want to create. So when we want to get, it's just a straight slash here, and that denotes that you can access the get from just this URL. But if we want to create, we have to add the create word on the URL. Now slash create, then we're going to make our JSON. Now, if you're like me, JSON is pretty difficult to type out, so just go ahead and open up your user model. So user model, and just copy the whole schema. Open up some kind of AI, any AI you prefer, anything will do, and then just tell it to make me 5 data for this schema in JSON format. Right, there we go. And then we just one by one put that into the request there. Boom, 201 created. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Right, so we just created all of those. How do we know that we've created all of them? We switch back to get, remove the slash create here, and then let's get the list of users. There we go, it's all there. And we double check our database as well. It doesn't refresh on new data right away. You have to manually refresh it. To manually refresh it, just hit the 3 dots here on the connection, and then refresh databases. Open it back up again, and your data should show up. There we are. Now, I just gave you guys the template for our backend. Now, if you remember, our task was quotes, so I'll leave it to you guys on how to make it. It's going to be the exact same process. In fact, since you already made all of these, the users, the user model, the user controller, user router, all you pretty much have to do is just copy paste it, rename, uh, quote model, then just rename everything. Quote model. There, rename, quote, quote. Nope, almost forgot that one. So, const quote. And what do we want from quotes? We want date, we want the author, title, yada yada yada. So there you guys go. I hope this is able to catch you up if you have indeed fallen behind, and I hope this helps you retain that knowledge further so it becomes kind of second nature to you guys to start up an Express app, because trust me, there's going to be a lot of Express apps, especially when you're working with bleeding edge technology. Well, yeah, good luck, guys. Next video is going to be how to set up our Angular application. Thanks.